What if the moment you finally stop chasing her is the exact moment she starts feeling your absence the deepest? Not because you manipulated her, not because you played games, but because for the first time, she realizes your attention was never weak. It was a gift. Most men think walking away is about revenge, about making her regret losing you. But Marcus Aurelius would laugh at that idea, because a man who walks away only to be noticed never truly walked away at all. And here is the hard truth most men never hear. A woman feels your absence differently when you leave with silence, dignity, and self-respect. Not anger, not begging, not emotional chaos. Silence. And that silence can echo louder than 1,000 desperate messages. So if you've ever wondered what truly happens inside a woman's mind when a man finally stops chasing, watch until the end. Because the final lesson may completely change the way you see attraction, emotional control, and your own value forever. And if this message speaks to something deep inside you, subscribe, like the video, and stay with me until the end. Because this is not just about women. This is about power. Inner power. The kind Marcus Aurelius spoke about centuries ago. The kind most men today have forgotten. There's a strange moment that happens after a man walks away. At first, she may not react at all. In fact, sometimes she becomes colder, more distant, more silent. And weak men misunderstand this moment completely. They panic. They think she never cared, so they return. They text again. They explain themselves. They beg for closure. But what they don't understand is that emotions are rarely immediate, especially for someone who became comfortable receiving your energy every single day. Human beings rarely value something while it is constantly available. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that attachment clouds judgment, that when we become addicted to attention, validation, or affection, we lose control of ourselves. And many relationships today are built entirely on emotional addiction, not love, addiction. A man constantly checking his phone, waiting for replies, overthinking cold messages, losing sleep over delayed responses, slowly abandoning his own purpose just to maintain someone's attention. And the tragedy is, the more he chases, the less valuable he becomes in her eyes. Not because women are cruel, but because human psychology works in a very specific way. People feel the weight of something most when it is no longer there. That's when memory begins speaking. That's when silence becomes emotional. That's when she starts replaying moments she once ignored. The late-night conversations, your consistency, your calmness, the emotional safety you brought into her life. And suddenly, the space you leave behind becomes impossible to ignore. But here is where it gets dangerous. Most men walk away physically, but emotionally they are still crawling back in their minds every single day. Marcus Aurelius warned against becoming enslaved by external things. And that includes people, because if your peace depends on whether someone texts you back, then your peace was never yours to begin with. Real power begins when your emotional state no longer depends on another person's validation. That is when walking away becomes transformative. Not just for her, for you. And strangely enough, that inner shift is exactly what she feels. Women are deeply intuitive when it comes to emotional energy. They can sense desperation, but they can also sense emotional discipline. A man who leaves quietly and focuses on his life creates mystery, not fake mystery. Real mystery, because his absence forces questions into her mind. Why isn't he chasing? Why did he suddenly become silent? Did he finally realize his worth? And those questions begin growing in silence. You see, constant availability kills curiosity, but emotional independence creates respect. This is why some men become more attractive after they leave. Not because they are pretending not to care, but because they finally stopped abandoning themselves. And there's something deeply unsettling about a man who no longer needs approval to feel whole. That energy changes everything. But let's go deeper. Because what a woman feels when you walk away depends entirely on who you were while you were there. If you were manipulative, if you were dishonest, if you were emotionally weak and constantly seeking validation, then your absence may simply feel like relief. That is the truth. But if you were grounded, calm, present, authentic, if you genuinely cared without losing your dignity, then your absence creates emotional contrast. And emotional contrast is powerful. Suddenly she notices the difference between your calm energy and the chaos around her. She notices how rare consistency actually is. She notices how exhausting superficial attention feels compared to genuine presence. Because many men today are loud, performative, emotionally unstable. But a disciplined man, a centered man, he becomes unforgettable. Marcus Aurelius believed that a man should not waste energy trying to control others, only himself. And ironically, the moment a man masters himself is often the moment others begin feeling his value most deeply. There's another hard truth no one talks about. Sometimes a woman only fully realizes your importance after losing access to you. Not because she's evil, not because she used you, but because human beings often understand value through absence. This happens with health, with youth, with time, and yes, with people. That's why desperation destroys attraction. Because desperation says, I don't believe I can survive without you. But calm detachment says, I value you deeply, but I will not abandon myself to keep you. And that sentence alone contains more masculine power than endless emotional speeches. A Stoic man does not beg for love. He offers presence, and if that presence is not respected, he leaves with peace. That kind of emotional control is rare today. Most people react emotionally to everything. A delayed message ruins their mood. A rejection destroys their confidence. A breakup consumes their identity. But Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that external events are temporary. The mind gives things meaning, nothing more. So when a man walks away without hatred, without bitterness, without trying to punish someone, he demonstrates something incredibly powerful: self-respect, and women feel that. Even if they never admit it, especially if they never admit it. Because deep down, emotional stability feels safe, and safety creates emotional impact far stronger than temporary excitement. Now listen carefully. Walking away is not about making someone suffer. It is about refusing to suffer endlessly just to keep someone close. There is a difference. Weak men stay where they are disrespected because they fear loneliness. Strong men accept loneliness temporarily rather than betray themselves permanently. And that decision changes a man internally. You can see it in his eyes, in his posture, in the way he speaks. Because every time a man tolerates disrespect to avoid losing someone, he loses pieces of himself. But when he finally says enough, something awakens. Not arrogance, clarity. And clarity is attractive, not only to women, to life itself. The Stoics believed that peace comes from alignment, from living according to your principles, rather than your impulses. And many men today are controlled entirely by impulse. Impulse to text. Impulse to chase. Impulse to explain themselves endlessly. Impulse to seek reassurance. But discipline creates emotional gravity. The ability to remain calm when emotions are pulling you apart internally, that is power. And when a woman sees a man who can control himself under emotional pressure, she sees strength most men never develop. Now, of course, some women will let you go and never look back. That's reality. Not every connection is meant to last. Stoicism teaches acceptance, not fantasy. Marcus Aurelius constantly reflected on impermanence. People change. Feelings change. Life changes. Trying to force permanence onto temporary things only creates suffering. So if someone chooses to leave your life, let them. Not because you never cared, but because clinging destroys dignity. And here's the strange part. The men who are most difficult to forget are usually the men who accepted endings with grace. No emotional explosions, no manipulation, no endless paragraphs trying to force understanding. Just silence, growth, movement forward. That kind of departure lingers in the mind, because calm endings create unanswered emotional tension. And humans remember unresolved emotions far longer than dramatic chaos. That's why sometimes months later, a woman suddenly thinks about the man who quietly disappeared, the man who did not beg, the man who respected himself enough to walk away, the man whose silence said more than words ever could. And suddenly she wonders, did I lose someone rare? But by then, that man is often no longer emotionally available in the same way, because during silence he rebuilt himself. He returned to discipline, to purpose, to peace. And this is the part nobody tells you. Walking away changes you, not just the relationship. You begin realizing how much energy you wasted seeking validation, how much anxiety came from attachment, how much suffering came from trying to control someone else's feelings. And eventually you discover something freeing. Your worth was never dependent on another person choosing you. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man's value comes from the quality of his thoughts and actions, not public approval, not romantic validation, not attention. And when a man truly understands this, he stops fearing rejection. Because rejection no longer defines him, it simply redirects him. This mindset transforms relationships completely, because now love becomes a choice instead of a dependency. You stop loving from fear. You stop chasing from insecurity. You stop tolerating emotional disrespect just to avoid loneliness. And ironically, that is when your presence becomes most powerful. Because people can feel when someone is emotionally free. Free people are rare. Most people are trapped. Trapped in validation, trapped in attachment, trapped in fear of abandonment. But a Stoic man learns to stand alone peacefully, and that peace becomes magnetic, not loud, not arrogant, quiet, solid, certain. And women feel that energy deeply because calm masculine presence has become increasingly uncommon in a world addicted to emotional chaos. So what does a woman truly feel when you walk away? Sometimes confusion, sometimes curiosity, sometimes regret, sometimes nothing at all. But the deeper question is this: what do you feel when you walk away? Do you feel emptiness because your identity depended on her attention? Or do you feel pain mixed with dignity because you finally chose yourself? That answer changes everything. Because the real lesson was never about controlling how she feels. It was about mastering yourself. Marcus Aurelius understood that the strongest man is not the one who controls others emotionally. It is the man who remains calm within himself. The man who can lose attachment without losing his mind. The man who can love deeply without becoming weak. The man who can walk away without hatred. That is rare. That is strength. And in a world full of noise, emotional chaos, and endless chasing, that kind of silence becomes unforgettable. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.